that it might be scoffing toward people of faith or toward faith in general,
Sure.
to find a way to take advantage of that because you might not get the opportunity again.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, keeping Jesus in the sports conversation. Here's your host for today's show, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
He is Rece Davis from ESPN. Hi, Rece. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you? It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good. It's been a long time since we actually saw each other, but it's great to see you. Great to have you here on Sports Spectrum. We were just talking before we started hitting record, and we're similar boats. My daughter is a sophomore in college, or going to be a sophomore in college, but we only have one child. And so when she went away to college last year, my wife and I became empty nesters. You're a little bit advanced in the stage of terms of your kids and the ages that they're at, but it's kind of similar. You're in this new empty nest stage as well, aren't you?
We are, and we're getting accustomed to it. We sort of call it a pseudo empty nesting. And, the one thing I think, while my wife Lee is spectacular, and I couldn't be more blessed to have a marriage like this, but we both, while we're enjoying the time together, we both, if allowed, would hop in the time machine, go back to when they were little kids and do the whole thing over again. And, so we are, no matter how much I think you love your spouse, you invest so much in the kids that it's different. Even if you're happy, it's still different. It's exciting. She did show me a video, Jason, the other day of a comedian that woman stood up, and she's a Southern comedian, and she said, all of these kids ran off and left this house, and they left me with their daddy. Like, so there might be some of that with my wife Lee too. So.
Oh yeah, well, I'll tell you, and that's amazingly funny, but probably a little bit true too, because I think a lot of us, and I know I felt this way too, we invested so much into our kids, to my daughter, and I'm obviously my job and your job, obviously, and the demands that comes, that sometimes the marriage can be neglected, not intentionally, but just in a way that you forget to pour into your marriage just as much as you pour into your children. So I'm kind of with you in like going back and saying, I'm not regretting anything we did. My wife and I are happily married, and I'm glad to have the time I do with her, but I think we would probably have done things a little bit different, as much as we love our kids, to invest, not to forget to invest in our marriage as well.
Yeah, Jason, I think we did a pretty good job of that, but we did it as a collective. It was almost like, I know there are individual relationships within the family dynamic, but we were a lot of the four of us together, even when they were little. Not that we were sitting around really gossiping, but there was something that needed to remain private at the dinner table, even when they were tiny.
Sure.
One of us would say, this stays on our ball club. That was, I guess, a nod to the sports that we were into. It's like, this stays on our ball club. And we kind of kept it that way. So, I don't know that we missed out that much nourishing, but there are time demands that keep you from having that individual time occasionally that you need with your spouse. And then it can be a jolt to the system when they're left with us, I guess, when it's over. But it is when, not over when the kids are grown. So it's a different dynamic, but it's still a fulfilling one. And I think the relationships that you and your wife are finding right now, and that we are finding as well, is that the relationships are different. And the instinct is to always go into parenting mode and try to go fix everything. And while I view our role still is to try to help remove obstacles as best we can, there are also times when they have to clear the obstacles themselves, and allowing them to do that, whether they're, different stages, whether they're 5 or 25, is probably the biggest adjustment you have to make as a parent, I think. So.
Rece Davis is here with us on Sports Spectrum. You started in March of '95 with ESPN. I didn't realize that. I had gotten there in July of 2000. So you had been there 5 years already when I got there. Do you remember, or of course you remember, but what was your first gig when you got to ESPN? I'm curious on this one.
My first assignment was to do the old Sports Smash on ESPN2.
Sports.
And
Yeah.
the Sports Smash, well, it was within the old Sports Night show that Stuart Scott and Susie Colbert hosted. And Kenny Mayne, me, and Deb Kaufman were
Yeah.
the three Sports Smash update anchors. So top and bottom of the hour within that show. And then within mostly taped programming, but sometimes, at hockey or college basketball or something, and you'd get to do the hockey intermissions. And if you had the extra time, then more than 2 minutes to do a hockey intermission, you felt like you were on TV forever, and it was the greatest night ever. So that was the first gig. I hadn't been there long. I was actually out on the story when they pulled the plug on on Sports Night, and took a little bit of wandering in the wilderness, I guess, because before I finally moved over to SportsCenter, because I was told, and being naive and not really fully understanding how the business worked, I was told when I was hired, don't come in asking to do SportsCenter. We're creating separate entities, and if you're on ESPN2, we don't want you crossing over. And so I was trying to do what I was supposed to, and it almost got me relieved of my duties before I got started, before I finally convinced someone to give me a shot at SportsCenter in January of '96, and then things went a little better from there.
So that's an interesting 10 months, I guess, right? Between March of 95 and January of 96. There's, and you had made this decision to come to Bristol, Connecticut, and ESPN, I would say in 95 was about to hit its apex in terms of popularity for this guy that you're talking to. I was 21 at the time. I was still in college in 95. And the 96, 97, 98, 99 frame was, to me, I got Dan's and Keith's book, on the big show. And it was starting to really seep into popular culture. But for you, those 10 months, were you always desiring to be on SportsCenter, even though you were you just happy to be there, or you were like, no, I want to be on SportsCenter?
Well, at the time, I think everybody that was doing sportscasting wanted to be on SportsCenter, and I certainly was not the exception to it. I will say that my ultimate career goal was always pretty much to do what I'm doing now, not game day per se, but to do to have a prominent role in college football and college basketball. Those are the two sports that I've always loved the most. But at that time, you wanted to be on SportsCenter because there was a market validation that went with that. There was some job security that went with that. There are just a lot of things that made it the most desirable place in sports broadcasting for a guy like me if you weren't a play-by-play guy, because I had done very little play-by-play. Almost, I would say 95% of the play-by-play I've done since I've been at ESPN. I didn't come up, through the ranks doing that. I came up as a host. And so doing SportsCenter was the way to get there. So I definitely wanted to, and it was a thrill when I finally got the opportunity to do it. There was also some pressure involved, Jason, because I'd been called into the office and told, you haven't done anything wrong, but it was time for them to pick up the option, 9 months into the first contract. And so they're sort of beating around the bush about what they're wanting to say. And I said, are you guys considering firing me? And they said, well, we don't have a role for you. And with the Sports Night having gone, and so that was a tumultuous period and led me to try to chase down the right executive. I had meeting after meeting after meeting, and I finally remember, we sort of laughed about it. Well, I didn't laugh about it for a really long time, but in recent years, what I've seen, and we chuckled about it, I finally got to Howard Katz, this was during the Christmas holidays too.
Yeah.
And Howard had been away, I think on vacation perhaps, and we came back and we met, and I said to him, look, I've only been here, and they tell me it may not go. And he said, you haven't done anything wrong. He goes, all I said in the meeting was, well, what are we going to do with him? And so I told him, I said, when I was hired, I was told not to come in and ask to do SportsCenter. And I said, I tried to do what I was asked to do. I said, but no one comes to ESPN to do the 2-minute sports smash at the top and bottom of the hour. Of course I want to do SportsCenter. Yeah. And he said, well, that's fine with me if you want to go give it a shot. So there was a lot of pressure in that, that first night to do. And I've told this story a few times, but I came upstairs. It was old, as you probably remember, the Late Show back then was on at 2 a.m. Eastern time. So I did a show with Brett Haber, and I came up, and my message light was on in my cubicle, and I thought that perhaps it was my wife, my sister, my mom, somebody calling saying, "Oh, we watched the show," and I dialed up the message and listened, and it was Keith Olbermann. And I did not, I didn't know Keith well. Even that was a bad job by me, kind of staying in my corner and trying to stay in my lane. I should have been cultivating these relationships. I didn't do a good job of that in the first few months. Yeah. And he basically said, "I saw the show. I assume you want to do this. I'll let." He had no idea I was about to get whacked. He said, "I'll let them know you should be in the rotation." Oh, this is KO, as if I didn't know that. But and he hung up. And there are, I think maybe philosophically in the way we look at life, there's not, there might be a lot of differences in my perspective and Keith's perspective. But, whenever I've heard over the years someone criticize Keith for one thing or another, my response is always, yes, but. I was like, yes, but he's a friend because, and he's, he is, I still think that he's, with all due respect, Dan is the textbook, but Keith is the best to ever do it.
Wow.
Watching him ride a show was I would say the only guy that is able to touch audiences in that slightly offbeat yet brilliant way that I've seen of all the great anchors we have, and everybody has their great individual styles. I would say Scott Van Pelt is in that vein, but KO could sit down and knock out a show in 15 minutes, and it would be brilliant prose and insightful and historic and encyclopedic in its knowledge, and it was really a remarkable thing to see. But I don't know that he ever went in and said anything on my behalf or not. I don't know the answer to that, but I do remember that. And because it was an odd thing, because while I didn't have this relationship with him that I wanted validation from him, because of my regard for his talent, the fact that he called and said that was good and worthy, and you should be with us, I thought, well, if they decide to whack me, I'll know that I was right and they were wrong. If nothing else, mostly because of that. But fortunately, it worked out for me, and it's just part of the things I think that help you maintain perspective from the business side of things as we go through this.
And remembering too, Rece, and that's a great story, that, and I have a lot of this too, that there are people who are going to believe differently than you, that might act differently than you, that might go in directions that are much different than you, that politically don't align, whatever, philosophically, like you say. But they're people that you work with, and there's been so many of those. I'm sure you have so many stories. I just think of people, like Jamel Hill and Bomani Jones, and so many people that others might look at and say, no, I don't agree with what they have to say. And I'm like, no, you guys don't understand. They were great people to work with who did so much for me and went to bat for me. And it just reminds me, like, in this culture, which is so divided, especially in social media world, like, these are people who, like Keith, just went out of his way to do something for you. And that goes beyond any other stuff, right? Like, obviously you might not align or believe or different, whatever, but that's a guy that went to bat for you, and that'll stick with you and stay with you forever.
For sure. And it's a great lesson for us, Jason, I think, in our beliefs, which are more aligned, you and I mean,
sure,
that we need to do that for people, and not just for people with whom we are aligned from a spiritual standpoint, because there are few better ways than to make an impact on someone than to do something for them when they can't really, or do they need to repay you for it, or you have nothing to gain from it. And that, I feel like that is part of what we're called to do. And it's a good reminder that everybody can try to do that, and everybody can be reached, and everybody can be touched in a lot of different ways. And I think it's a unifying thing that people cast, meaning our faith is what I'm referring to, is a unifying thing rather than a divisive one. Now, I know biblically, I know that there comes a time when it's divisive. I know the scripture on that, but I do think that there's also an aspect of it when you are when you are planting the seeds, so to speak, that it is more unifying than divisive.
Completely. Salt and light. That's how I look at it. Salt and light. Before I get more into your faith, I do want to ask, if people are listening, like, you got Rece Davis on your show, you got to ask him about college game day. And this is a question I bet you get from everybody. And this is, John Sawatsky would say, don't ask this question if everybody else is asking it, Rece Davis, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because our audience is maybe a little bit different of an audience. Your favorite game day that you've been a part of? Is there one? I mean, you've been a part of a lot of them now. It's been almost a decade, right, since you've been on college game day? What year did you get there in college?
2015. I was in college football studio for about, I think, 16.
Yeah, I remember those years.
Plus years. Yeah, sure. Prior to that. But I moved to game day in 15, so I'm about to start my 9th season. And the one that I always answer, and because it is a truth, is my favorite one was Washington State in 2018. Been several others that were, really, really cool settings. Memphis was awesome, several others. But Washington State, because of the crusade that their fans had been on, that was completely organic and orchestrated by all of their fans to make sure that their flag, Old Crimson, was at every show for 15 years on their quest to try to get game day to come to the Palouse.
Wow.
And when we decided to go, it was cathartic for those people. It was the wildest scene you can imagine. And with the time difference, the show started at 6. I got there a little before 4 Pacific time, and it was as far as the eye could see. It was people and flags, and they were singing, and it was an amazing, almost overwhelming thing. And it's like, I said this to someone yesterday, the thing about our show, we're not the Rolling Stones or the Jonas Brothers or Taylor Swift. They're not coming just to see us to perform. What they're coming for is they're coming to showcase something that they believe and that they are proud of. Their school, their team, their program, their town, their region, whatever it might be. In this case, Washington State University. And they view us as worthy, or a stamp of validation that their fandom and their passion for it is important, and that we view it as being important. And they want to show that they are the equal of anyone else, and they use us as a vehicle to do that. And it was an amazing morning. It never let up. From the time we rolled into town on Thursday, it was amazing, the reception we got. We're treated well everywhere.
Of course.
But there is a little bit of a difference when you go there, as opposed to, say, when you go to Columbus or Tuscaloosa or Athens, where they go, "Oh, hey, you guys are back. Good to see you." Or whatever. It's like almost like you're going to get, a summons for jury duty in Athens. Sometimes we're there so much, but it's, or have to pay property taxes or something. And it's, it's different when you go to a place like Pullman that you haven't been, and that will probably forever, because you won't repeat that first, you won't repeat that 15-year quest. All of the things sort of came together. And throw in, you have Mike Leach there too. Yeah, Mike Leach and Gardner Minshew wearing his mustache, and the whole thing. There were so many tentacles and elements to that show that I think that will probably always be my favorite one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I talk to a lot of people. A lot of people ask me about my time at ESPN. Obviously, it's such a neat place to say you have worked at or currently work at. And game day gets brought up a lot. I mean, I went and spoke recently at a Division II school, Ouachita Baptist University, down in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. And they have this amazing tradition. They said, "Hey, when you go back up there, talk to your game day guys and tell them to come down here." And I'm like, I have zero pull here, guys, but I will absolutely mention it. But the thing I wanted to bring to you, Rece, was these smaller places, these venues, and you've done a few of these. Like Washington State's still a, powerhouse or whatever, but these smaller venues, which you've done a few of those, there must be such a unique experience there. And the second question on the back end of this is there one that you haven't done yet? A place that you had read about or seen that you think, yeah, that'd be kind of neat someday. It's obviously got to be the right situation, the right circumstances, the right timing. But is there a place, that you haven't gone to yet too?
I think any of those that you mentioned, and I'm really embarrassed because I'm drawing a blank on Wachita's arch rival, which is like just across the ravine, right?
Correct. Yes, you know about it then. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. I would love to. I would love to go there. Mount Union has been great for so long at the Division III level. I think that would be a really cool place to go.
Mhm.
Those are a couple that are on the list that we kind of look at. A lot of times, some of those games and some of those moments hit during the rivalry portion of the season.
Right.
But we went to Cat and Grizz last year. Montana State and Bozeman, and that's a little bit bigger FCS level. Both are FCS powers, but it's something the Big Sky Conference had pushed, and both of the schools had wanted us to go, and they brought us there. And it was look, I lived in Connecticut for 27 years, and I lived in Michigan before that. I've been cold. I don't think I've ever been that cold. But it was awesome. It
Yeah.
was just spectacular.
Yeah.
And the fans came out, and our generators actually froze. They came in as we were getting ready for the show, and they said, "Just want you to know that we have no power on the set right now." And they had to bring in other generators. And during the show, it was still so cold. It was beautiful, and the sun was out and everything, but it was frigid.
Yeah.
I started getting messages from our producer Jim Galliero would say in my ear, "Okay, we're losing a generator. This part is down. It's okay. I'll talk you through it." They did such a good job of compensating that we really didn't notice that much. But man, in addition to the elements, we also were losing power out there because it was so cold. We were losing some of our toys and cameras and different things as we went along that day. But that was a great moment. Most of the places that we go that are off the proverbial beaten path usually give you something that's quite memorable.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get to one of those others and experience some more of that, because that's part of what makes game day and our job special. Is that, sure, you capture Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State, Michigan, and SC Notre Dame, but there's a whole wide world of college football out there that are that's full of interesting stories that we can tell, and interesting atmospheres that we can capture.
Yeah, I agree and there's a lot that I never heard of Wachita Baptist until last fall when they brought me out there, and I'm like, all right, well, this is pretty neat what you guys got going on here. So yeah, there's a lot of those type of experiences and atmospheres all around the country. Small time college football is just the best in many ways. Let me turn to your faith, and we haven't really gone there yet, but we have this motto called "I once was" that Sports Spectrum has been sharing a lot of videos, meaning I once was lost and now I'm found. It's kind of that story, right? Our testimony. Can you share a little bit of what your maybe "I once was" story is, and just coming to faith and the importance of the Lord in your life?
I was really fortunate, Jason, in that I grew up in a Christian home where faith, Bible study, attending church every time the doors were open, which I need to do a better job of that now. But
Sure.
we never missed, and that was part of it. I remember when I was a kid that we read the Bible as a family every night. And I have a younger sister, but she's 14 years younger than I am. So both of us sort of grew up as only children. So in this period of time, this was prior to her being born, there would be Monday Night Football. I would be wanting to watch Monday Night Football, at least for a while, until I had to go to bed. And we didn't do that until we had done our devotional that night. We sort of, we read through the Bible, and, my father served as a deacon prior to my mom's illness, when he stepped down for that. But he had served in the community, and the church where we went is not affiliated with or was not affiliated with a denomination, though some in the South are probably familiar with the Church of Christ. And as a deacon, his role was basically to serve, and whether that meant driving the church bus, or going to visit, or taking care of things for people who need it. I saw this modeled and example by my parents from the time I was born. So I was blessed in that regard. But there's always that moment when you realize that your faith doesn't get grandfathered in. And I was baptized when I was 13, 13 going on 14, and stayed active. And I think when I went to college, I was a pretty boring guy, pretty straight laced kind of guy anyway. But there was a man called Buddy Bell who was a campus minister at Alabama at the church there, and he actually had known the man who was the preacher at our church who had performed my baptism. And he came over before I left for Tuscaloosa and said, "You should look him up." And I did, and we became very close friends and remained so. He performed at our wedding ceremony. I'm going to see him this summer at an event that I'm speaking at. So, it's I think it was then when I got outside of the bubble of Northwest Alabama, where it seemed as if anyway at that time that everyone goes to church somewhere, and really what you're arguing over is structure within worship services, and yes. You realize there are bigger obstacles out there. I think when you get away, when you get away from that. So I think when I went to college and realized that that people are watching you, and that regardless of your station alive, they'll notice how you treat them, and it will reflect upon what you say you are. And are you able? And look, people listening to this, there might be someone listening saying, "Well, I can give you 15 examples of where Rece Davis wasn't, what he says he is," and
Sure.
They would probably be right about that. But it's something that you continually strive to do. And I think that's probably, I don't have, to be honest, I have many moments of repentance, maybe is a better way, over the course of my faith. But I don't have the story that many people have that are so inspirational that they didn't know the Lord at all. I basically came out of the womb being taught that, and I'm so grateful for that. And the one thing I found as you get older, though, is that the challenge there, that Satan's going to use any kind of challenge against you, is that you can take that for granted too. So it's I feel like that mine is more of a story of constantly trying to repent and get it right, as opposed to the big turnaround where I got on course and stayed there.
Well, there's moments, right, in our faith where it feels like, you might feel like either drifting or you just don't feel close to God, and it's not a feeling per se, right? It's a daily walk. But then there's those days when you realize, man, I'm not the best representative today. I am not the best ambassador the Bible uses in 2 Corinthians today. But I think that's why it's a relationship, right? Like there are days that you have that are bad, or not the greatest with your kids, or the greatest with your spouse, I'm sure. As you started to grow into your journey as a broadcaster, and certainly ESPN takes it to a whole different level, right? With everybody watching, and you realize there's a lot of people that watch this channel, that watch this show every single week, every single day. How have you wrestled, if that's even the right word, with your relationship with God, and also being a good ambassador, right? But also trying to continue to pursue your dream and pursue this wonderful career that you've had?
It's because there are things that come along with that, whether it's, financial blessings or, notoriety, I guess.
Sure.
Hesitate to use the word fame. I don't know if we're famous, but, there is some notoriety that goes along with it. I think one of the things you wrestle with is making sure that you stay grounded, and realize that just because you do something for a living, or you have something that's temporary, that I struck up a conversation with a man in a waiting room several months back, and he made the comment that everything that he was talking, he didn't, I don't think he realized who I was, and or not, what I did, but he was just talking. He said, everything that all these people out here are striving for, we're all just renting it. We're gonna give it all back, and
Right.
things like that. I think that you constantly are reminding yourself of. It's one of those things that if you start to get the big head, or if you have moments in your life, like I've lost both my parents, my son, almost lost my son, catastrophic accident or collision on a baseball field.
Right.
And when you have those moments, and you realize none of this other that distracts you um, really matters. And you're on your knees praying for things then. And you're on your knees praying for things all the time, but then you're praying with a perspective that I think is godly, in that this is, I understand, not that this happened to you to make you understand, but you understand this is all that really matters in this relationship. And I'm asking you for this, and I have no power over this. And it's I think probably that's the type of thing that has helped remind me. And I've also had, I've been blessed to have a couple of guys that I work with that are just tremendous men of God and influences, whether it was Hubert Davis, David Pollock, LaFonso Ellis now, that are Jonathan Wiley, who's a producer with us, and Kirk Herbstreit, Darren Brown, all of us, we talk spiritually. We have we have a little text back and forth sometimes, and David and I are particularly close in this regard, and checking each other, challenging each other, all of those things. And I think all of it kind of helps you if you start to get off track, if you do get off track and you start to make things more important than they are, or if you don't react to a certain situation in a way that you should, or if you start thinking you're important, and that's a good thing about Pollock. And I think you've had him on your show. Pollock's not going to pull any punches. If you're out of line, he's going to tell you, and he expects you to do the same to him. And it's it's been great to have like-minded men around you at times, sometimes, so that hey, if I venture into an area, if I make some joke, or I cop some attitude, or I do this or that, they know they're going to call me on it later. Fonz is going to let me know, why'd you do that?
Accountability, right? It's accountability.
It's good. Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing, and it's done in love. We had a moment too, like Jonathan Wiley, who I mentioned earlier, is a producer, and just, well, I mean, always digging in his faith and sharing.
I remember him. I remember
sharing sermons he's heard, and sharing what he's studying, different things like that. And when Lee Corso had a little health issue at Clemson, there were a few of us that stepped aside privately and prayed together for him. And so having people like that around you, it helps you keep things in the proper perspective, and it doesn't allow you to drift too far, because you're all there for each other.
Yeah, it's accountability too, right?
Yeah.
Like, just knowing if you're working. I remember when I was at ESPN, I had a couple people that worked in our department in the talent area, and even then when I did social and digital, that were believers. And you don't treat anybody differently, and you want to be a great teammate to all people that you work with. But those people know, like, I asked them, like, keep me accountable if I'm doing something that's not aligning with what I'm professing here. And I just think that accountability, and I had David Pollock on my prep sheet here to ask you about, just because him and Herbie and so many others, like, that's great. I think that you guys have a connection that you can keep each other accountable from a different perspective. And the importance, I got to imagine that's just been, has that something that's kind of evolved over the years too for you? Because I think when you're first jumping in, you're like, all right, I'm just trying to do my job well.
No, there's no question about it, Jason. No question about that. I mean, early on, it's still sort of in that, I think early on, you're in that mode of, well, I'm going to try to not do anything wrong, which is, a bit of a,
mess this up.
It's like a bit of a fool's errand, though. I mean, from a spiritual standpoint, and certainly you're trying to do that from a job standpoint. I'm not going to mess this up first. And as you develop the relationships, and you become closer friends, and you start talking about things, I think one of the cool things is, like, David's always been a man of faith, but to watch his faith grow over the past few years, and his perspective change, and just, he's always been all about his family, but now he's really pouring into them spiritually. And as important as sports are in his family and in our lives, he goes above and beyond to make sure that his kids know it's not, the number one thing, that, you're not missing this activity to do something that's, that's not related, to church. You're not skipping Wednesday night service. I don't really know when they have it exactly. When I grew up, it was Wednesday night service. You're not skipping that to go to do this. You're going to do this. It's most important first. Then you can go do that. And he doesn't do it in a heavy-handed way. He's doing it in a way that or he's modeling it for them. And he's having great impact on, on the lives of the young men that he's helping coach. He's like a volunteer assistant in high school. So, watching him do that, I think, is inspirational. It makes you go, okay, I may not do the same thing the same way, but that's a really important thing that's happening in his life. And there's a big impact there. I need to do that too in a different way. And, so it gives you opportunities to touch different people, and then you're challenged by it in a good way. You're not challenged by it in a competitive way. You're challenged by it like, this is how I need to live.
I want to ask you, you mentioned it, and I didn't have this in my prep, but I would love for you, if you were willing to share the story real quick of your son. You said he almost, almost died on.
The tough thing for this one, I've told it a few times, Jason, is that I'm a softie and I have a hard time getting through it without crying. So
okay. I don't want you to cry if you don't.
No, I don't want to either. I'm going to try not to. Basically what happened is it was what turned out to be his freshman year. This is a kid who, played all three sports at Avon Old Farms until his last couple of years, and he concentrated on baseball his first year. And basically, he had broken his nose a few times or in different things, but maybe he had twisted an ankle. I don't know. He never had an injury. Sure. And summer after his senior year of high school, he somehow dislocated his shoulder on a feet first slide in summer ball. Long story short, tried to rehab it. So he lost what was supposed to be his first year to that rehab. So he comes back the next year after this long, grueling shoulder rehab. He comes back, and I think it was our 7th or 8th game. We're playing Maryland in College Park. And he had worked his way in the starting lineup as a freshman who'd also been, almost 2 years away from a competitive game.
Where is he in college again, Rece?
Yeah, he was at Princeton at the time.
Princeton.
Yeah. And so he comes in, he's having a really good day, and he makes a catch. He's playing center. He makes a catch in center field, and the right fielder collides with him. Pretty good collision, but he hangs on to the ball.
Yep.
It was tough when you thought it looked bad. He stayed in the game. Came back to the plate a couple innings later, got another hit, had multi-hit day, and then by that night he was in the hospital. He collapsed, and I knew he wasn't feeling well. He collapsed, and we got him in the car and rushed him to First Hospital, which was completely incapable of dealing with him, and they couldn't get an ambulance to a hospital, which is another thing. And then they finally took him to Washington MedStar. And some of the same surgeons, some of whom we are close with, who attended to those who were shot at the congressional baseball game later, were him. There was a trauma hospital. He needed a trauma surgeon because he had ruptured his spleen.
Wow.
And so, it was. I said I wasn't going to do this, so I'll take a deep breath, clear my throat, we'll be good here. But it was a tough thing because it didn't seem like something you didn't see. It was a big collision, but you didn't look at it and go, whoa. And especially when he got up and stayed in the game. So you were a little thrown off by what happened. But he ended up, they tried to fix it. They thought they had. He continued to not really improve to the level that he needed to. So they basically opened him up from his chest all the way down to try to find out what was wrong. And as it turns out, there was a second grade 5, or the most serious laceration of the spleen on the other side they had not been able to see. So they removed the spleen because they couldn't do it arthroscopically, or didn't, and had to look because they weren't aware of what was happening. It made yet another arduous rehab. And I think that was that was a moment when we all, my wife, my daughter, and me, we all realized that, boy, nothing's more important than what you pour into family, right there. And it's probably, it's been pretty traumatic for us because, there are certain challenges. He's fine. He's playing pro ball in the independent leagues now, but there are still things, because of the immune system and different things, you don't have a spleen that, we talked earlier briefly about that protective nature of parents, and he hates this because he's made of steel and all of this, but he's he gets a cold, and his mom and I are like, are you okay? Do you have your antibiotics and all these things, the different things that you need. He's good with it. And his sister actually wrote her college paper thesis getting to school about the impact that it had on her.
Wow.
And so it was pretty traumatic time, and a difficult one. And when he started playing in this league after he finished, he did a couple of grad years, played a couple of years at Duke. When he did this, he acquiesced again, and he has a couple of times to tell the story to a reporter when they find out about it, because every time he goes into a locker room, they see the scar. He has to tell the story again, and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so after he did it this last time, he said, he told me, he said, okay, he goes, I'm gonna be nice. He said, but he said, I'll do a story with anybody, but next time it's got to be anything but son of sportscaster almost dies still trying to play. He said it's got to be something other than that. I was like, okay, deal.
Yes. No, I get it, man. I mean, that's just, as a parent, it's like and it's really those moments you mentioned it earlier in talking about your faith. That's when you feel like powerless, and you realize this is God. There are a lot of things that we try to control as people, and then you realize there are things that are completely out of our control, and you have to have faith, or the hope is gone, I feel like.
Yeah, it is. And I remember because the night that they took him in for the exploratory surgery, I mean, we'd been at the hospital hours after hours, been there, I think 3 days at that point, 2 or 3 days by then anyway. And so my wife and daughter had gone back to the hotel to try to sleep. And when they rushed him in, I had to call them and say, hey, you need to get back here. And because they were rushing him in the surgery when they realized he was still bleeding. And that was the time. There's a period of time that I was by myself, and you're just praying then.
That's all you can do.
And you are. You're powerless. That's there's it's in his hands then.
Yeah, so that's when you bring it down. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story. I wasn't trying to bring any tears out of Rece Davis.
I know. I'm a softie. They make fun of me, Jason, because while this is certainly genuine and authentic, my daughter says to me, if there is a sentimental moment on television, especially father-daughter, I'm a goner. I'm done. I mean, it's so embarrassing. That's something else Pollock and I bond over. Pollock and I'll, he's not as much of a TV guy as I am, but he'll watch, if he watches something sentimental like that. He's the waterworks go to.
Rece, not to be a company guy here, but I watched Finding Nemo last summer with my daughter. Finding Nemo. Okay. Yeah. And I'm ready to send her off to college. And I'm sure you've seen it at the very end of the movie. I think it's Marlin is the dad's name. And he's like letting his son Nemo go, to like fly, swim away on his own to be with his school. It was like after he had just went through this traumatic experience, and he looks at Nemo and he says, stay safe, son, or something like that. And I'm like a waterworks. I'm like,
I know it.
I go through this with my daughter, and I'm watching this stupid animated movie.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what that is. It's a really interesting thing, because I mean, I think it was, my dad was a warm, hospitable guy, but to bring tears for him, very small and traumatic moments where you lost someone, it certainly wasn't, Finding Nemo or the Goldbergs,
Goldbergs, right?
Like, don't get me, So yes. I don't know where that comes from. So I used to try to hide it. Now I wear it as a semi badge of I don't know if honor is the correct terminology, but a badge of something I'm not totally ashamed of, only partially.
No, it takes a little bit of maturity to get to that spot, Rece, I think. All right, as we wind down, my last question, you've been so generous with your time, so thank you so much. We ask this question a lot to our guests. I'd be curious to kind of know where you are. A lot of what we just shared, what has God been teaching you? What has the Lord been showing you, kind of impressing on your heart in the season of life you're in right now, where you are? What is the lesson you think that God has been kind of showing you?
That you have to take advantage of your time, and that you have to take advantage of the relationships to not procrastinate because you don't know how long they're going to last. And I don't mean that in a morbid way, but things change in our business life and our associations. And if you're going to make an impression on someone, if you're going to plant that seed, you need to find a way to do it. Now, that may be through inviting someone to study the Bible, and it may be through continuing to behave in a certain way. It may be through not backing down in a godly way, but not backing down when challenged or scoffed, or you hear a conversation about that it might be scoffing toward people of faith or toward faith in general.
Sure.
To find a way to take advantage of that, because you might not get the opportunity again. And there are a couple of things that are going on. I shouldn't say going on. A couple of relationships in my life where it's become acutely apparent to me that I need to find a better way to step into that more fully and try to have the example and hopefully the right influence that God can give the increase to those friends of mine who need it. And I think that's the thing, is to remind. I think I'm being constantly reminded that no matter how together people seem, they need it. They got to have it, because we're all, like I said earlier, we're all renting this. The rest of this is rented, and everybody needs it. And it's our, we're called. It's not just our responsibility, it's our privilege to share it. And when I shirk that, it's, I'm being taught that that's a waste, and I don't need to waste those opportunities.
Yeah, that's really well said. He is Rece Davis. College Game Day coming up. I mean, I say soon. By the time people listen to this, it'll only be about a month or so until College Game Day has its first show. So it'll kind of show up quicker than we could have ever imagined here. And I know the summers go by really too fast for you, Rece, but thank you for your time. Thanks so much. We're always cheering you on. We're always watching you, and thank you for your time here on the show. And hopefully we'll do it again soon.
I'd be honored. And I just want to say this. I don't know if I said it at the beginning, but I marvel at what you do. I always pay close attention to the people that you have on, and your dedication and your faith is inspirational, and it's having a huge impact. And I'm thrilled for what you do, and grateful that the Lord's given you this platform. You're using it quite well, my friend.
Well, that means a lot. I appreciate it, my friend. It was great being teammates with you, and we're still teammates, just in a little bit different way, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
absolutely.
Sir, always.
Thanks for doing it, buddy. Thanks so much for watching today on Sports Spectrum. Make sure you click that subscribe button so you don't miss any other videos. And if you want more stories on sports and faith, check out our website, sportsspectrum.com.